Hi, everybody. My name is Maddrey. I am the Diversity and Equity Fellow with NAMI Delaware, and thank you for joining us for another Sharing Hope Community Conversations. These are our monthly chats that we have each month with anyone, but particularly people of the BIPOC community, just around the topic of mental health and the different things that are going on and that impact our life. It's April, so it's Child Abuse Prevention Month. So that is our topic for the evening. I'm very excited. I have our guest with us today is Ebony Maddrey. Hope I said the last name correctly.
Maddrey.
Maddrey.
Yep.
Thank you. And I'm going to let Ebony just tell you all a little bit about herself.
So good evening, and thank you so much for having me. So again, my name is Ebony Maddrey, and I am owner and operator of Patchwork Human Services, where we provide outpatient mental health services to children and their families, and we're located in Claymont, Delaware. I have been practicing therapy now for almost 19 years. And it's something that is very near and dear to me. And so when I work with individuals, I pour everything that I have to offer into them. A lot of my work is primarily based around trauma. One thing people that are familiar with me know is that I always say I don't have a niche because I really don't want to be boxed in. But if I had to say something, I would say that my niche is people.
I love that. Well, thank you again for joining us. I know, we never want to think about kids being hurt. So it's a rough subject, but it's one that needs to be had because that's the only way we really prevent it is with awareness about it.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things, just to right off the bat, that I think most people find startling and upsetting is knowing the rate with which those who are acting with child support or with child abuse are usually somebody that the person knows. It's usually like the person that you think is the best to leave your kids with because you know them and they're closest. It's actually more cases of child abuse are done by an individual they know. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. And that's the thing I always tell families when we're working and we're focusing on child abuse in particular is that don't look too far outside of the family, right? Because that's the thing. We teach our kids stranger danger, but we don't necessarily talk to them about like really protecting yourself and standing up to anybody that makes you feel uncomfortable in their presence. And so you're correct with that. Most cases do happen from someone that is extremely close to the family.
And I think that it's important to teach kids body autonomy at a very young age. And I feel like it makes me happy because I think that conversation is being had more. I think I know for me, without aging myself, our younger years, it was, the parents are always right, adults are always right, kids are seen and not heard. And even things like giving your aunt or uncle a hug, and if you don't want to, it was like, just do it, you have to. And I feel like I love that we are now getting to a point where it's like, no, if you don't want to give them a hug, you don't have to. And I think teaching that body autonomy is crucial.
It's extremely crucial. And even when you were saying that, think back to like any part of your body that the bathing suit doesn't cover, right, is off limits. Or any part that the bathing suit covers is off limits. But I do think that it's important to talk to them and to give the body parts the names that they are, right? We don't need people saying, oh, my teapot, when they're talking about their vagina. And then if they're in school and they say, oh, my teapot is hurt or my teapot is broken, right? Naturally, you're going to think that, oh, this kid must have a toy at home that is broken and not really being able to say exactly what it is. So I definitely think that, again, like you said, that's super important.
And that's a major part that you bring up. And I know it's uncomfortable for a lot of parents, which is that kids should call their body parts by the correct name. But for some reason, people are like, well, I don't want to teach a child like what these words are. And it's like, they're not bad words. They're just human body words. Just like you have an arm, you have a penis. Like it's just human body words. But like, how can parents work around that to get more comfortable with them and to introduce those to their kids?
Well, I think it's being able to shed the way that they were taught right? Growing up, we were taught not to say those words because they're vulgar, or, oh my God, I can't believe that you just said vagina or that you said penis. No. And even with my children, I have three, as soon as they could talk, they were able to identify their body parts. Like, so you will have a 1-year-old saying my penis, or a 2-year-old saying my vagina, right? And I think we just have to normalize it. And, I am the queen of having uncomfortable conversations. So that's right up my alley. And we can model that for our peers, for our children, and as we step into becoming grandparents and so forth and so on, but just to normalize, the names of the various parts of their body.
And what are ways to have like the conversation of tell me if anything goes on without scaring the kids? Because I think that that's also a hindrance in people wanting to have those conversations, or how to introduce that. Like, they don't want to plant a seed, but like, what's a good way to sort of have that type of conversation?
I think just having it. I think teaching parents to master how to control their own emotions. I always tell parents too in therapy that if you can manage your own emotions, you're going to get way more information from your children, right? So if you can practice just being in a complete state of calm, they're going to spill the beans, and checking in with them. So if they are somewhere, how was school today? Did anything happen that I should know about today? Has anybody ever touched you? And let's talk about that. There are plenty of books and things out there as well. But again, we as adults have to kind of step into the space of being comfortable enough to have the conversation. So I think it's just that, because kids are going to react off of our emotions. And so if you come to me and you tell me something and I lose my cool, then now I'm going to shut down because I think that I did something bad. And now mommy or daddy is upset, or now the kid steps into trying to parentify the parents and to protect them from the thing that they need protection from. So I think it's just that, like, really just forcing yourself to have these conversations, and under that whole umbrella of normalization.
Yeah. And I think that those conversations, to make them comfortable, need to happen semi-regularly, just Absolutely. In general. But what are some signs that a parent could look out that says, like, we really need to have this conversation because I think something might be going on? Like, what are some signs they can look for with their child?
I think any sudden changes in behavior, I think that it's important for parents to pay attention to newly found like oral fixations, so think about younger kids that out of the blue start putting things in their mouth, or they always put their fingers or their hands in their mouth, right? And so it's things like that. We want to make sure that we pay attention to whether or not they are suddenly afraid of everything. Are they afraid to go up the stairs by themselves? Are they afraid to go to the bathroom? So that's like the basic things. Kids that kind of withdraw, and even with older kids, if you see a kid who goes from being completely jovial all the time to now being reclusive and isolating and not really wanting to be around, maybe not even making eye contact, fidgeting, the list is so long, you know what I mean? I just think that if I had to kind of condense it, it would solely be to just pay attention to those sudden changes in behavior.
And then I know something that is incredibly difficult and nobody wants to think about, which is that sometimes in cases of abuse, it happens in the home. With not just a parent, but sometimes with siblings, older siblings, especially. Like, how would someone try to navigate that situation if they feel like one child may be abusing the other child?
Well, I think it's about, and I've seen it, you know what I mean? Just being in this field, we see a lot of things, and it's a really hard and tough position for any parent to be in. And, and while the conversation is kind of leaning towards sexual abuse, it could be that physical abuse or that emotional abuse. So we want to make sure that we're kind of touching on all of those areas. But I think that when it comes to a parent having to choose, I think if we look at the facts of protection, right? This kid may need more help, to deal with being a perpetrator. But one thing that we know is that most perpetrators have been victimized themselves. Right. And so I think that that's the biggest thing for parents. And so it's not to become hardened against that child that becomes a perpetrator as much as it is to really kind of dig deep and to figure out what would possess them, like what's at the root of this child acting out this way with this child. Because everything stems from something, and so I think it's just that, and informing the parents to have grace with themselves whenever in a situation like this, because sometimes people take on the guilt of not knowing and not protecting, right? But their siblings, how could you know that was going on? And so again, it goes back to having those frequent conversations of checking in, like, are you good? Has anybody ever touched you in this way? Has anybody ever hit you? Has anybody ever said these things to you? Let's talk about it. How did it make you feel? What was happening right before? Where were the other adults? And so I think that it's just that. And with all of it, it's being able to normalize having those hard conversations like you started out with.
Yeah. No, and that's a great point. Thank you for sharing. I love also that you mentioned that there's different types of abuse, because I want to touch on some of those as well. A particularly touchy subject with people is spanking. I declare my anti-spankingness, but I know that for a lot of people, it's discipline, and it's a form of discipline that's been passed down from generations to generations, without necessarily putting your own personal, or my own personal thoughts on spanking in general. How do you know when there's a difference or address between their disciplining and they're abusing their child?
Good question. And so I did some work with DFS, right? So the child welfare, right? And so one thing that you're taught in the training and when we go out and educate families is that spanking is allowed. It's not forbidden, right? But it has to be with an open hand. It can't be with a closed fist. You should not leave bruising, if the spanking is excessive. And, so there are ways to you can discern what's abuse versus what's not. So if I spank you because you ran out into the street, or I caught you playing with fire, like a lighter or something, right? And I spank you to say, or to, kind of get you to understand, like, these are things we don't do, right? Versus I am going to, you know what I mean? So there's a difference. So spanking, some people would say is warranted in some situations. Other people are completely anti-spanking and you should never hit a child, And so I think we can't parent all kids the same, and each kid needs something a little different, because there are kids that are receptive to the talking and just the look in the eye of disappointing mom or dad. But then there are others that are just like, they might need a little contact, right? But according to the guidelines and the law, like, you are allowed to spank as long as it's with an open hand, it's not excessive, and you're not leaving bruises on your kid.
And so first of all, I feel like this conversation should be had way before having children. But let's say you're in a relationship with a partner who's for spanking and you're not, or even just let's say you're both okay with spanking, but you feel like theirs is excessive. Like maybe it's closed fist sometimes, maybe it's too much sometimes. Like, what is a conversation that would be had between two adults to address that?
I think that in any situation, it's just having that open line of communication, right? Because again, we all come from something different. Our outlook is a little different, but really sitting down and having the hard discussion to say, listen, this is inappropriate. I can't sit back and watch this play out, talk about all of the consequences that go along with it, right? So it's one thing to happen in house, but these babies are going to school. These babies are going to daycare, right? They're in camp, whatever. They're in whatever programs. And let's say just by happenstance, there's a bruise on their leg. And let's say they're wearing loose shorts and, there's a handprint. Any adult that sees that's in the field or working with the child will have a responsibility to report that, right? And so really just having that candid conversation with a partner, like, we can be proactive so that we don't have to go down this path, but I need you to hear me out. So I think it's just that, getting your partner to like really hear you out. And we know that people can be strong-willed and bullheaded, right? And unfortunately, some people have to learn the hard way. But the thing with any type of report is that it can be founded or unfounded. And I always tell people, and I know you didn't ask me this, I'm kind of going there,
No,
but
it's
I
fine.
tell people that in the event that a report has to be made, right? It's not saying, oh, you're an abuser or your kid is in this abusive environment. It's just saying, I saw something that was reportable, and now the state has to do their job and come out to check for the safety and welfare of the children, right? And so, and that they have their own process. But as mandated reporters, there are times where we have to make those reports. So just be mindful that if you are in a relationship and the partner is being excessive in their form of discipline, like getting them to understand that there's a domino effect to this, right? And so while discipline is great, we have to be mindful how you go about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And something that's also hard for people to differentiate between discipline and love or abuse is emotional and verbal abuse. Especially for some of us, I'm first generation from an immigrant parent. So like, that tough love from the immigrants'
Yes.
parents, which to them it's not being abusive. It's just telling you how it is. It's love. And I feel like we're also kind of like we were talking about before, moving to area of talking about things more and being a little bit, even though some people hate the term, more gentle parenting. There is still quite a bit of that tough love out there. So when does it cross over from being, I'm trying to toughen them up, I'm trying to prepare them for the world, to I am causing them the trauma that they will need therapy for later?
I think it crosses over. It's based upon the individual's perception and outlook and their own personal experiences, right? Because I always say what's traumatic to me might not necessarily be traumatic to you. And I think that it's important as providers that we consider culture and cultural norms, right? Because yeah, like I know when I was growing up, my great grandmother would be like, go back and get a switch, right? Did I think that I was being abused? Absolutely not. Were there times that I did something where I probably deserved to be smacked or whipped with this switch? Yes. But not that I would whip my children with switches, right? Because it's also the evolution of things. When we know better, we do better. So I think that that's something we can't just put in a box. I think that it goes back to the first part of the conversation with the kids are going to be in front of other people, right? And so if I am working with a child and let's say that she did get whipped with a switch and there were whelps, I would have to make that report. But also in doing so, I would have a conversation with the child, right? Age appropriately, the child, and then the way that I operate. And everybody doesn't do this because we also know that being a mandated reporter, you can be anonymous in making these reports. And actually anybody can make a report if they see any signs of what they deem to be abuse. They can make a report and then it's up to the state to figure out what the next steps are. But one thing that I pride myself in is that during the times where I've had to make reports, most times I have been able to have a conversation with my families to explain to them, like, listen, this is why I have to do that. Now, if it's a situation where the kid is in imminent danger and I feel that in sending them back into the home is going to be unsafe for them, then that would be a time where I would not necessarily have that conversation, right? And so I think that when we think about what's crossing over, it's a lot that goes into trying to figure that out.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and that actually touches on my next question. And we've sprinkled it a little bit here or there throughout this conversation, but like, what are some things that people might look for that says like this needs to be reported? Like, I need to bring people in, especially because a form of abuse that we also haven't talked about is like neglect. And that happens a lot of times with kids as well. So like, what are some things that they would look for that would lead them to want to contact authorities for help?
So, like you said, if their needs are being unmet, it goes back to also looking for both verbal and nonverbal cues. right? Because some kids are a little more vocal than others. Some kids will kind of go inward and try to hide. Paying attention to those things, like if it's the summertime and a child is showing up in a big puffy winter coat, what are they hiding under that? If it's the wintertime and they don't have socks and underclothes on, and you know what I mean, like trying to assess that. And if it's something that's ongoing, those are reportable things. If there are no lights or running water in the home, like these are things that we wouldn't necessarily think about. But if there are no lights, and let's say they're off for an extended period of time, or there's no running water and that's for an extended period of time, that would be deemed as a reportable thing. Again, the visible scars, right? The sudden changes in behavior. And also I think that when there's like the refusal to get children certain help, like behavioral health or mental health or medical help, right? All of that will fall under neglect as well. And so that will be reportable. Yeah, so I think, I'm trying to think what else. The unexplained injury. So those kids that are constantly hurt, like we know some kids are just accident prone, right? But then there are some injuries, and then think about it, there could be an injury where the story doesn't fall in line with the injury, right? And so I think it's also tapping into that discernment as a provider or as someone that is in contact with kids. Yeah, so all of those things.
Yeah, and I think that we're blessed that you've had some experience working with the Child Protective Services, because another question I would ask is, I think people also want to know what happens after that. Like, we watch the movies, we watch the show, and I think a lot of people think like, there might be something going on, but if I call, they're going to take their kids away from them, and then I'll be responsible for destroying this family. And then the foster care system does not have a good rep, rightfully so, with protecting kids. So it's like, what if I put them in the situation where they're more apt to be hurt than where they were? So like, can you just tell us a little bit about like what the process is after someone calls in that they think something might be going on?
I think it's that, and I think that's why I am so adamant about having the conversation for the family to help reduce heightened levels of anxiety, because it's a very scary thing, and especially if you don't know what happens on the other side, right? And so many times when a report is reported, it could, like I said, most times they're unfounded. And it's just a matter of, okay, they're going to come out, they want to interview all members of the family, they're going to check the home. And it's not like they're pulling out your dresser drawers and things like that, but they just want to make sure you have the basic needs, that your water is on, that your lights are on, that there's food in the refrigerator, that the kids have a proper place to sleep, right? And I think sometimes too, people are like, well, oh my God, we don't have beds. We just got rid of our beds for whatever reason, and the kids are sleeping on pallets. That is perfectly fine. Like DFS workers understand that people are out here lifing, right? And life is happening for individuals, but the biggest concern is just the safety and welfare and care for the children. And so helping families to understand that, because a lot of times when a report is made, naturally, and the instinct is to lash out at the person that made the report, as opposed to taking a step back and saying, you know what, this person made this report because something that could be going on with my kid. And if it isn't, that's awesome, right? But it's just being able to cross those T's and to dot the I's. And so in the event that they come out, the case will stay open for 30 days because they'll have to circle back just to make sure everything is still intact. And then most times after that is closed out. It's nothing that will impact a parent from getting a job. If DFS has to come out and a case is unfounded, like that will not, people don't have access to that. And so I think that that's the other thing. Now, in the event, in extreme cases where, let's say, a kid absolutely has to be removed, most times is because the kid has to be removed, and it's not that that particular system is in place just because they want to break up families. And I know that that's the stigma behind it. But again, most times when kids are removed, it's because it's warranted. And with DFS, the first thing they're going to do is they're going to try to identify family members that could take on these babies. So it's not like we take them or that the system takes them and then they just plop them into foster care. That's not it. The whole goal is really to keep families together, and to make sure that the children are with people that they're familiar with. And so I hope that that eliminates that myth for anybody that's listening. It's not that kids are removed from their families and then automatically sent to foster care. Like foster care most times is a last resort.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you so much for sharing that. And then the last question that I really had is, when is a good time to bring in therapy for children, in general, and also in cases of abuse? I think when we think about child abuse, it's like you should probably see someone, but there are times in life in general as well. So in both of those scenarios, like when's a good time to bring in a therapist? And also, what's the best way to search for a therapist for your child?
I think that the best time is whenever you see those changes, right? I think that we need to normalize the word therapy and, kind of introduce it early on, because then kids won't feel like it's something bad or I did something wrong and now I have to go talk to this lady, right? But if therapy is a word that is normalized in the home and amongst the family, then it's like second nature for a kid to come in and speak with a therapist, right? And I tend to put it in words as though now you have your person, right? And I am a person that's not connected to your family. You can come in, this can be your hour of dumping, whatever, but letting them feel empowered to know that this is a safe space. I think that if there are major changes in the family, so it could be a sudden move, it could be a divorce, it could be that there was a domestic dispute between the parents. It doesn't even have to be something that was ongoing. But I think so many times we minimize those experiences that the kids have. And a lot of times, adults feel that kids won't remember, like if they're young, but then it comes out in other ways. So even if they can't articulate it, it tends to bubble to the surface. And so I think the best way to find a therapist for your child is to ask questions, and search around to see if this therapist is trained in a specific area. So like, let's say if there was sexual abuse, does this person have a background in sexual abuse? Would they be able to talk to my little person about it and not cause more harm, right? Is this person trained in, like family dynamics, whatever the situation is, trauma responses, and, like, are they trauma informed? And so I think it's just asking the questions. There are many directories out that kind of house like clinicians of color is one. Like there's the Brown and Black Therapist of Delaware.
Yeah.
Right. And so there's Psychology Today, and you can just put in a word in the search engine and it will populate people who specialize in those areas. And so, and again, therapy doesn't have to be anything that's intimidating. You can call the number on the back of your insurance card, and get a list of therapists in your areas. But I would just tell parents that it's just like conducting any other interview. You want to make sure that the therapist is a good fit for you and your child.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't thank you enough for the great information that you've shared with us today. And you, Ebony, you are the owner of Patchwork Human Services.
Yes.
.com. That's the website, patchworkhumanservices.com. If they want to find you and get in contact with you.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's the easiest way. The number to the office is 302-501-6641. And again, I am located in Claymont. I am actually inside of the Claymont Community Center. And, so that location is completely accessible. And so, yeah. And if it's not me that they need to work with, I can always refer out.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much to those who are joining or who are watching this at home. We're going to turn off the recording now and have the second part of Sharing Hope. If you ever join us live, the second part of it is off recording if anyone wants to share or talk about anything we have that conversation after. So if you're watching this later on YouTube, thank you. But also think about joining us for a live session. Again, my name is Maddrey. I'm the Diversity and Equity Fellow with NAMI, which you can find us at namidelaware.org. Right, have a good night.
Thank you.